The war room hummed with the quiet tension of men and women, accustomed to life-and-death decisions. Yet something about today made even the most seasoned officers uneasy. The air smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic, mixed with the faint tang of old leather from worn chairs. Officers in crisp uniforms stood along the walls, medals glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights that buzzed incessantly above. Every eye flicked nervously to the door as it opened, expecting a high-ranking official or perhaps another intelligence analyst. Instead, she entered. No announcement preceded her arrival, no fanfare, no security detail. Just a solitary figure in a plain dark jacket, her boots striking the floor with quiet precision. Her hair was tied back, practical, and her eyes scanned the room with a calm, calculating intensity that seemed to weigh every person, every detail. She moved deliberately, without haste, yet her presence commanded immediate attention. Even the officers who had seen the horrors of war instinctively straightened, their spines stiffening as if compelled by some unspoken law of respect. General Harland, seated at the head of the table, watched her approach with a keen eye. The general was a man who had seen decades of conflicts, who had led men into impossible situations, and had learned to read the subtle tells in human behavior. And yet, something about this woman unsettled him, not in fear, but in the rare recognition of a fellow professional who had lived in shadows he only glimpsed through reports. His eyes narrowed slightly, catching the light, as he noted her posture, straight-backed, controlled, every movement purposeful, yet relaxed. She was the kind of person who could make an entire room fall silent without a single word. Her boots stopped a few feet from the table. She did not sit. She did not announce herself. She simply stood, waiting, her hands resting lightly at her sides. The silence she carried was palpable, a weight that pressed against the shoulders of the officers, who had prided themselves on their nerves under pressure. Whispers, initially low, stopped as soon as they began. Something told everyone present that this was not just another brief. This was history in motion, unfolding before their very eyes. The general leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the polished mahogany surface. His voice, deep and commanding, cut through the tension like a knife. "Step forward." Her gaze lifted, meeting his without hesitation. There was no fear, no hesitation, only the still, unwavering composure of someone who had faced danger far beyond what anyone in this room could imagine. Every officer present instinctively held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. She moved another step forward, her motion smooth, measured, yet almost imperceptibly graceful. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in slightly, as if the very air conspired to focus all attention on her. Officers who had fought through urban warfare, ambushes, and covert operations felt an unfamiliar tension coiling in their stomachs. It wasn't intimidation. It was recognition, the kind that comes when a person encounters someone who operates on an entirely different plane of skill and experience. General Harlan's eyes were sharp, scanning her carefully. "Your name," he said, his tone calm but authoritative. The words echoed across the silent room. "Your call sign?" She paused for a fraction of a second, long enough to make everyone in the room lean forward unconsciously, straining to catch a hint of hesitation, a slip in composure. There was none. Her expression was neutral, almost unreadable, but there was a flicker of something deeper confidence tempered by experience, steel hidden beneath calmness. "Specter 6, she replied, her voice steady, clear, and carrying an unshakable certainty. The effect was instantaneous. A wave of shock rippled through the room. Officers froze mid-breath, eyes widening, jaws tightening. A few exchanged glances so brief they could have been missed, but every person present understood the significance. The name Specter was not just a call sign. It was a legend, A myth whispered in the most secret corridors of military intelligence. A name that had not been used for decades, associated with missions so classified they were erased from official records. Silence descended like a physical force, pressing down on the room, heavier than any stack of dossiers or weapons schematics could ever be. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to dim under the weight of collective disbelief. The officers' minds raced, recalling fragments of classified reports, stories half forgotten, whispers of a unit that operated in absolute secrecy. Specter 6 was a ghost, a myth, a name that should have been lost to history. And yet, here she was, standing alive, breathing and answering directly to the general. The general himself did not immediately react. His jaw tightened, and for a fleeting moment, his mind flickered back to reports he had read and dismissed as legend. Reports of operatives who completed impossible missions and vanished without a trace. Operatives who were considered expendable, yet always returned, or so the rumors claimed. He realized then that this was not a rumor. This was reality standing before him. A junior officer dared a whisper, but the words died in his throat as her eyes flicked toward him briefly, sharp and assessing. It was not threatening, but it was a silent warning. No one questioned Specter 6 and survived unshaken. She did not speak again. She did not need to. Her very presence carried authority and experience that no rank could match. The room slowly regained composure, but the tension remained, a taut string ready to snap. Officers adjusted in their seats, some nervously, others in awe. All sensed that the upcoming briefing would be unlike any other they had ever attended. Whatever mission lay ahead, it would demand skills, courage, and precision that few could comprehend, and one woman here had already proven she possessed them in abundance. General Harland finally leaned back slightly, his fingers steepled before him. His eyes, steely and calculating, met hers. There was no surprise, now only recognition. Recognition that she was the solution to problems the military could not afford to fail at. The weight of expectation, history, and secrecy all rested on the thin shoulders of this operative, and yet she seemed unburdened, calm, and ready. The silence lingered a moment longer before the general spoke again, his voice softer now, tinged with something almost like respect. Specter 6, your reputation precedes you. You understand the gravity of what lies ahead, yes? Her response was a simple nod, understated yet suffused with confidence. There were no words needed. Everyone in the room understood. The mission would not be easy, the risks unimaginable, and yet the person standing there was the only one capable of seeing it through. And so, the briefing began not with maps, intel, or orders, but with the undeniable presence of a living legend. Every officer present knew that history had returned to the room, embodied in a woman who carried a name that had haunted classified files for decades. Specter 6 was no myth. She was real, and the room would never be the same. The room remained suspended in silence after she spoke. Specter 6. The words hung in the air like an invisible weight, twisting around the officers' minds. For some, it was recognition. For others, disbelief. A name once whispered only in secret corridors, classified documents, and rumor-laden reports, now reverberated in the very air of the war room. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to pause, waiting, as though the building itself had acknowledged the presence of a legend. General Harland's sharp gaze never wavered. He had anticipated this reaction, but the silence struck him nonetheless. It was not just the officer's shock, it was the collective acknowledgement of history stepping back into the present. The call sign Specter had once represented near impossible skill, absolute secrecy, and a level of danger that even the most seasoned operatives could scarcely imagine. 6 implied that she had been part of a select group, the kind that had been erased from official records decades ago. Whispers flickered along the walls, quiet and almost imperceptible, yet potent. A junior officer muttered, "I thought—" They were all gone. Another nodded, eyes wide, lips pressed tight. The veterans, men and women who had fought wars and survived ambushes, exchanged subtle, wary glances. Some felt awe, others a creeping unease, and a few tried to hide the recognition dawning on them. Specter 6 was no ordinary operative. She carried a weight, a reputation, and a history that most had been trained to ignore. The general finally broke the silence. His voice was deliberate, measured, betraying no emotion, though his eyes flicked to her, sharp and calculating. "Specter 6, we weren't expecting you to be present." He paused, the phrasing betraying the truth he tried to conceal. "Most believed you were lost during the Vega mission. That was decades ago. Your presence here, it changes everything." Her expression did not waver. She met his gaze evenly, a calm contrast to the murmuring tension around her. "I survived," she said simply. Nothing more, nothing less. It was not a boast. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of someone who had faced death repeatedly and come through unbroken. The simplicity of her words carried more power than any report, any dossier or briefing ever could. The officers in the room felt the silence pressing against their nerves again, heavier this time. Memories of classified files flashed in their minds, names crossed out, missions erased, whispers of operatives who vanished and never returned. Specter 6 had been one of those ghosts, a phantom whispered about in declassified briefings only available to those with the highest clearance. And now she was standing in front of them, alive, breathing, real. Even some of the younger officers, who had never heard of the Specter program, sensed the shift. There was authority in her posture, precision in her movements, and a quiet intensity in her eyes. She was the kind of person who could move unnoticed, strike unseen, and command attention without uttering a word. The very presence of someone like that altered the atmosphere of any room. It was instinctual. It was primal. One officer, braver or perhaps more foolish, spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "They said, you didn't make it. The Vega mission?" His words trailed off, choked by the weight of disbelief. She tilted her head slightly, the corner of her mouth curving almost imperceptibly. "I did," she replied. Her voice was calm, measured, and carried the gravity of someone who had stared into death and returned unshaken. "And I completed what others could not." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. The general leaned forward, his elbows resting on the polished table. "Tell me," he said slowly, "how you survived. How you became real again." Specter 6 did not answer immediately. Instead, her eyes scanned the room, taking in each officer, each line of tension and doubt etched into their faces. Her presence was magnetic, commanding, and a quiet authority settled over the room as she began. "The Vega mission was compromised," she said finally, her tone neutral, almost clinical. "Our team was ambushed. Communications failed. We were assumed lost. Extraction was impossible. All protocol was breached. And yet, survival was mandatory. For me, for the mission, for the lives depending on it." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The silence this time was expectant, waiting for her next move. "I moved through enemy lines undetected. Days turned into nights. Nights turned into survival. I completed the objective, ensured vital intelligence reached command, and returned when the opportunity presented itself." A few officers shifted uncomfortably, realizing that the reports they had dismissed as legend were not only real but understated. They had no conception of the discipline, skill, or danger required to accomplish what she described. And yet, she had done it, alone against impossible odds, and without anyone knowing the full extent. One officer, veteran of multiple covert operations, whispered under his breath, "She's impossible." Another nodded silently. Even the general, whose experience spanned decades, felt a flicker of disbelief. Specter 6 was a myth returned, a ghost among living soldiers. And yet, she was undeniably present. The general cleared his throat, voice low and measured. "If what you say is true," he said, "then you carry information and experience that no one else here can replicate. Your presence changes the scope of what we can achieve. We may finally have a chance at missions previously deemed unattainable." Specter 6 simply nodded, acknowledging the weight of responsibility without arrogance. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the tension surrounding her. Officers who had expected arrogance, bravado, or explanation found none. Instead, they were confronted with quiet efficiency and almost terrifying competence. Another junior officer, unable to contain curiosity, asked, "Why now? Why return?" She glanced at him, eyes sharp but not unkind. "Because the threats have evolved," she said, "and because the world still needs people who can act when no one else dares. I am here because the mission requires it, not because of legend or recognition." The room fell silent once again, though this time the silence was heavy with respect, awe, and a twinge of fear. Specter 6 had established herself not by words alone, but by presence, reputation, and sheer authority. She was more than a soldier. She was history returned to the present, and everyone in that room understood it instinctively. The general finally leaned back, allowing himself a faint nod. "Very well," he said, voice low and deliberate. "If you are truly Specter 6, then the coming mission will test every skill you claim to possess. And if you succeed, you will remind the world why legends exist, fail, and the consequences will be unprecedented." She did not flinch, did not hesitate. "I do not intend to fail," she said simply. Again, no arrogance, no flourish, just the unshakable truth of someone who had survived impossible odds before. Officers shifted in their seats, understanding that the room had changed. Where tension had filled the air before, now there was an almost electric anticipation. Specter 6 was not just present. She was a force to be reckoned with, a living embodiment of skill, resilience, and determination. She carried history in her eyes, experience in her movements, and a calm authority that no rank or uniform could surpass. For the next hour, the briefing began in earnest. Maps were laid out, intelligence files distributed, and every officer present knew that the discussion was unlike any they had attended before. Yet for all the details, all the plans, all the logistics, one truth overshadowed everything. The return of Specter 6 had changed everything. The room had been filled with disbelief and tension, but now it was filled with cautious optimism, awe, and the undeniable knowledge that the impossible had arrived and was standing before them. By the time the meeting adjourned, whispers had circulated. Officers had glanced nervously at each other, and General Harland had issued orders with the quiet knowledge that the presence of this one operative would tip the scales of fate. Outside, the world continued, oblivious to the history being written in a single room on a single day. But within those walls, one name had reclaimed its power. Specter 6, a legend returned, a myth made real, and the beginning of a mission unlike any other had begun. The silence following her introduction lingered longer than most officers could bear. Specter 6. Even repeating the name mentally sent shivers through those present. It was a call sign whispered in the most classified corridors of military history, a legend so feared and revered that officers were trained to avoid its mention outside of high-security clearance. And yet, here she was, alive, breathing, standing in the center of the room as if the past itself had returned to demand attention. The general's gaze lingered on her. He had known about the Specter program, the rumors, the erased reports, the ghost stories, but he had never truly believed any operative had survived. They said the unit had been disbanded after the Vega mission, that its members vanished or were absorbed into untraceable operations. The last record of 6 was incomplete, marked confidential, and erased from nearly every database. Some believed the operative was lost forever. Some whispered she had been executed for failing an impossible mission. And yet, now she stood in front of him. The officers tried to focus on the briefing materials spread across the table, but all attention kept flicking back to her. Every small movement, a shift of weight, a turn of the head, a narrowing of the eyes seemed calculated, deliberate, commanding. She did not speak, yet her presence spoke louder than words ever could. The call sign was not just a title. It carried weight, authority, and fear. It was proof that someone had achieved what others could only imagine. Whispers grew louder, barely suppressed, as officers remembered fragments of classified intelligence and long-forgotten rumors. Specter 6. One muttered, glancing at a colleague. They said, "No one survived Vega." Another officer shook his head, lips tight, eyes wide. Then why? Why is she here? Specter 6 seemed to sense the weight of their doubt, the unease that rippled across the room. She did not flinch, did not shift uncomfortably. Instead, she stood like a sentinel, unwavering, exuding a calm that demanded focus and respect. Her history, though partially erased from official records, was known in fragments and rumor, enough to inspire awe. She had not only survived impossible missions, but had repeatedly exceeded expectations in environments where survival was considered unlikely. The general finally spoke again, voice low and deliberate. The call sign, it carries a legacy few understand. Very few know what it takes to earn it, and fewer still survive its weight. Tell me, 6, how did you earn it? Her eyes met his, unwavering. She did not smile, did not hesitate. I did not choose it, she said softly. It was given after Vega, after surviving the impossible, after completing a mission others could not, after walking through fire while others perished. It was not a reward. It was recognition, a recognition of endurance, precision, and resilience that could not be taught. The words caused another ripple of murmurs. Officers leaned closer, trying to reconcile what they were hearing with what they knew. The Vega mission was infamous, a covert operation whose details had been mostly classified, erased, or buried under layers of secrecy. Only fragments had been allowed to leak enough to inspire rumor and fear. According to those whispers, Specter operatives were unmatched, trained to infiltrate, survive, and extract with surgical precision, their existence barely acknowledged by official channels. The general's jaw tightened. He had read every fragment, every report, every file. And yet, none could prepare him for the tangible presence before him. He could feel the weight of history in her stance, the unspoken proof of her survival, and the undeniable authority her call sign carried. This was not simply a soldier returning. This was a legend come to life. Legends do not return, one officer whispered under his breath. Another shook his head subtly, barely audible. They die, or they fade into the shadows. Yet here she was, alive, standing among them, silent but commanding. Her past, though fragmented in the minds of the observers, unfolded in their imaginations. She had been recruited young, plucked from obscurity and trained in isolation. Days turned into months, months into years of survival training, combat simulation, and mental conditioning that few could endure. She had learned to move unseen, strike silently, and disappear completely. She had been forged in the shadows, tempered by fire, shaped by missions so impossible that any failure would have meant death. And yet she had survived. Vega had been the culmination of years of preparation, the ultimate test of skill and endurance. A mission so dangerous, so complex, that failure had been expected by those who orchestrated it. And yet she had succeeded. She had navigated through hostile territory alone, avoided detection, extracted vital intelligence, and returned. The operation had been officially marked a disaster because most of the team had not returned, and the full details of her actions had been suppressed. Only the call sign remained a single symbol of what she had endured. The officers could sense her history, pieced together in fragments by whispers, rumors, and the faintest hints left in classified files. She carried the weight of missions no one else could accomplish, the precision of a soldier trained beyond the limits of human capability, and the resilience to survive when others perished. Specter 6 was not just a person. She was an institution, a force that existed beyond normal understanding. The general leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table, his eyes locked on hers. "If what you say is true," he said slowly, deliberately, "then you are not merely an operative. You are proof that the impossible can be achieved. The Vega mission, your survival, it rewrites everything we thought we knew. Every mission, every strategy, every operation will now be measured against what you can accomplish." She inclined her head once, acknowledging his words without arrogance. Her calm authority silenced the room again, and officers began to understand why the call sign carried more weight than rank or medals ever could. It was a testament to survival, skill, and determination in the face of impossible odds. The junior officer who had whispered earlier swallowed nervously. How did you do it?" he asked almost reverently. Specter 6's eyes softened slightly, though the intensity never left them. "Focus," she said simply. "Precision, discipline, and the understanding that failure was not an option. When everything else is impossible, you rely on skill, training, and resolve. You survive because giving up is not a choice. And when others fall, you take responsibility not for glory, but for what must be done." Her words hung in the air. The officers sat back, silent, feeling the weight of the legacy she carried. It was one thing to read reports, to hear rumors, to glimpse fragments of classified operations. It was another to stand in the presence of someone who had lived those fragments, whose every movement, every breath, every word carried the gravitas of history itself. General Harlan's expression softened, though only slightly. He had commanded hundreds of soldiers, orchestrated countless operations, and faced threats that would have broken lesser men and women. Yet he recognized something different in her, an almost supernatural competence, honed through years of surviving where others could not. Specter 6 was history walking, a living embodiment of the elite, the unseen, the legends whispered about in fear and awe. "And now," the general continued, his voice low and deliberate, "we have a mission that demands someone beyond ordinary skill, someone who can operate where all others would fail. I believe you are that person." Her gaze remained steady, unwavering. She did not flinch, did not hesitate. She was ready, as she had always been, shaped by impossible odds, tempered by shadows, and defined by a call sign that had become more than a name. Specter 6 was no longer a rumor, no longer a legend in secret files. She was alive, she was present, and she was prepared to prove that the legacy of her name was earned in action, not in words. As the briefing moved forward, officers tried to focus on maps, dossiers, and strategic plans, but all attention kept flicking back to her. Every thought, every glance, every decision in that room was influenced by the undeniable truth. Specter 6 was the living embodiment of history, skill, and survival. And the world she was about to enter would never forget her name. Specter 6 had become a legend long before she ever appeared in that war room. Few knew the full extent of her history, and fewer still had ever glimpsed the experiences that forged her into the operative she had become. Her past was a labyrinth of shadows, survival, and relentless training, a life that had begun far from recognition, far from glory, and far from anyone who could understand the demands placed upon her. She had been recruited at barely 20 years of age, plucked from obscurity for a program so secretive that its very existence was classified above top-level clearance. No one spoke of it outside the most secure channels, and even within, only whispers and fragmented reports existed. The program sought to create operatives who could survive, adapt, and execute missions that defied the limits of human capability. They were to be invisible, unstoppable, and unmatched. Her early months of training were brutal beyond imagination. Isolation was a constant companion. Days blurred into nights, and nights blurred into exercises designed to break the human spirit. Hunger, sleep deprivation, extreme physical exertion, and psychological manipulation were tools used to test resilience. Where ordinary recruits faltered, she thrived. Her mind adapted to exhaustion. Her body learned to respond instinctively. By the end of her first year, she had survived exercises that would have shattered others, emerging with a clarity of thought, reflexes, and endurance that seemed almost unnatural. Every skill she learned was honed for one purpose: survival in the impossible. Hand-to-hand combat, silent infiltration, advanced marksmanship, demolition, and survival in extreme environments became second nature. She trained in deserts, jungles, and urban ruins, learning to navigate terrain that would overwhelm even experienced soldiers. She mastered the art of vanishing, of blending into her environment so completely that she became effectively invisible. And she learned the harshest lesson of all: when everything else failed, only self-reliance could guarantee survival. The Vega mission, which had cemented her call sign, was the ultimate test of all she had learned. Intelligence had identified a high-value target deep inside hostile territory, a mission so sensitive and dangerous that few believed it possible. Teams had been assembled and disbanded, operations delayed, and planners whispered of impossibility. The stakes were monumental. Failure would result in catastrophic geopolitical consequences. And yet, the young operative, barely 2 years out of training, was selected not as part of a team, but for her ability to operate alone when everything else fell apart. The mission began under the cover of darkness, the world oblivious to what was about to unfold. She infiltrated enemy lines with precision and patience, relying on instincts sharpened by relentless training. Each step was calculated, each movement deliberate. She avoided detection, not through luck, but through discipline, observation, and an understanding of her adversaries that bordered on prescience. Days passed, and the mission deteriorated. Communications failed, supply lines were cut, and the extraction team was compromised. Orders became impossible to execute. Many would have retreated, surrendered, or perished. But she pressed on. The mission had become more than an assignment. It had become a test of survival, of endurance, of purpose. Failure was not an option. Not because of medals, not because of orders, but because the lives dependent on her success would vanish if she faltered. She navigated hostile terrain with only a small pack of essentials, moving under the constant threat of detection. Food and water were scarce. Sleep was a luxury she could not afford. Every shadow hid a potential threat. Every sound could signal death. Yet she adapted. She became one with the environment, reading the terrain as a predator reads the movements of prey. Enemy patrols passed by without a hint of her presence. Every step brought her closer to her objective, closer to survival, closer to completing a mission that others had deemed impossible. The Vega mission reached its critical moment when the target was located in a heavily fortified compound. Security was tight, paths were deadly, and every wrong move would have meant capture or worse. Using stealth, misdirection, and skill, she bypassed every obstacle, neutralizing threats silently and efficiently. Her training had become instinct, her instincts sharpened by experience. By dawn, she had completed the mission alone, secured intelligence vital to her command, and extracted without leaving a trace. But the true test of her survival came after the mission. The extraction point had been compromised. She could not call for help. She could not trust anyone. Every decision, every movement, was a choice between life and death. For days, she navigated through hostile territory alone, relying solely on her training and intuition. Hunger clawed at her body, exhaustion threatened to paralyze her mind, and danger lurked at every corner. Yet she endured, moving steadily, silently, with unshakable purpose. By the time she returned, her team had been presumed lost. Official reports had marked the mission a failure. Her survival was classified, hidden behind layers of secrecy. Only the call sign remained as acknowledgement. Specter 6. It was not a reward, it was recognition. Recognition of endurance, skill, and resilience beyond ordinary human capability. Her past was not filled with accolades, media attention, or public recognition. It was filled with shadows, survival, and secrets. Each mission she undertook, after Vega, reinforced her legend. She became the operative others whispered about in fear, the one who could accomplish what no one else dared attempt. Her reputation was forged not in glory, but in silence and shadow. The war room officers could sense it now. Even without full knowledge, they felt the gravity of her experiences. Each subtle movement, each steady breath, each glance carried the weight of countless impossible missions survived, challenges overcome, and enemies outwitted. Specter 6 was more than a soldier. She was a testament to the limits of human endurance and skill. She had become living proof that some legends were not myths, they were real, breathing, and present. General Harlan's voice finally broke through the weight of history surrounding her. Your past. It is beyond comprehension. Few could endure what you have survived. Few could emerge intact. And yet, you stand before us, ready. Her eyes met his, unwavering, unflinching. Survival is a choice, she said. Every mission is survival, every action deliberate, every risk calculated. I carry no illusions. I know the cost, and I accept it. I am here because it is necessary. Nothing more. The officers listened, some with disbelief, some with awe, all with the understanding that this operative had been shaped in ways they could scarcely imagine. Her past was a tapestry of danger, precision, and survival, a legacy unrecorded in history books, unrecognized by the public, yet undeniable in its impact. In that moment, the room understood something fundamental. The call sign Specter 6 was more than a name. It was a statement, a declaration that the impossible could be achieved, a warning that someone existed who had mastered the art of survival when the world deemed it impossible. A legend made flesh, walking among them, and ready to redefine every expectation of what a soldier could accomplish. And as she stood silently, letting the weight of her hidden past settle in the minds of those around her, everyone in the room realized that the coming missions would not be ordinary. They would test every skill, every nerve, and every strategy. But with Specter 6 at the center, the impossible had a chance to become reality. The hidden past, shrouded in secrecy, had returned not as a ghost, not as a rumor, but as a living, breathing force of history, experience, and unyielding competence. And for the first time, the officers understood that they were no longer dealing with ordinary humans. They were dealing with a legend, Specter 6. The war room had been transformed. Maps were spread across the table, satellites' images pinned to the walls, and folders filled with intelligence lay open. revealing encrypted data, schematics, and lists of targets. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Officers who had moments ago been captivated by the legend of Specter 6 now focused on the mission ahead. It was one thing to witness history. It was another to prepare for what could very well be a catastrophic operation. General Harlan stood at the head of the table, his gaze scanning the assembled officers. The quiet tension of the room had shifted from awe to a mixture of fear, anticipation, and cautious hope. "We face a threat unlike any before," he began, voice steady, controlled. "A rogue network has acquired technology capable of destabilizing regions. They are armed, dangerous, and intelligent. Our intelligence suggests they have already executed operations that indicate strategic sophistication. If we fail, the consequences are catastrophic." The officers nodded solemnly. This was no ordinary mission. Satellites had captured glimpses of heavily guarded compounds, weapon shipments, and encrypted communications that suggested advanced, coordinated operations. The dossier contained intelligence so sensitive that even the generals had only skimmed the surface. Lives hung in balance. Nations could shift. And in the center of it all stood one operative, the only person deemed capable of tipping the scales in their favor, Specter 6. The general's eyes locked on her. "6, the mission is yours," he said, voice deliberate. "You will lead a strike team to infiltrate, extract, and neutralize the threat before it reaches operational capacity. Every aspect has been considered, every risk assessed. But understand this, failure is not an option. The network is adaptive, ruthless, and prepared for the unexpected." Specter 6 scanned the materials briefly, eyes sharp, assessing, calculating. She did not need to review every detail to understand the complexity. Her mind worked differently, anticipating threats, analyzing risk, and planning contingencies almost instinctively. Yet she nodded once, simply, a gesture that conveyed both acknowledgement and readiness. The junior officers present exchanged nervous glances. Few had ever witnessed someone like her in action, and fewer still understood what she was capable of. The maps showed urban sprawls, desert compounds, and densely guarded facilities. Enemy movements were unpredictable, and intelligence gaps were significant. Most would have felt overwhelmed. Most would have panicked. She did not. Her calm authority radiated through the room, subtly imposing order on the chaos of fear and uncertainty. One officer ventured, hesitantly, "We've calculated the network's movements. They expect a strike team, but they won't anticipate." He paused, swallowing. "Her." The general allowed a faint smile, almost imperceptible. "Exactly," he said. "They won't anticipate her. No one will. That is why she is indispensable. She has the training, the experience, and the instincts to move where others cannot. Intelligence alone will not succeed. We need precision, silence, and adaptability." Specter 6 stepped closer to the table, her eyes scanning the mission materials again, though much of it was already imprinted in her mind. "We move at night," she said, voice calm, precise. "Cover is critical. Minimal engagement. Extraction points are compromised, so we adapt as we go. Timing is everything. Any deviation can compromise the mission, or worse, our lives." The officers absorbed her words, realizing that her plans were not theoretical, they were based on experience. Instincts honed in impossible conditions, and an understanding of human behavior in extreme scenarios. She was not merely planning an operation. She was orchestrating survival. General Harlan spoke again, emphasizing the stakes. "Specter 6, your team consists of the most capable operatives available. Their skills complement yours, but they rely on your judgment. You are not just leading them. You are the linchpin. Their lives and the mission depend on your decisions." Specter 6 nodded once, acknowledging the weight of responsibility. "I understand," she said. "We move silently, execute efficiently, and adapt constantly. Objectives are clear: infiltrate, neutralize, extract, and return undetected. Anything else is secondary." The briefing continued with details of terrain, enemy fortifications, communications, and potential threats. Officers leaned over maps, taking notes, but all eyes kept returning to her. Every decision, every observation, every movement she made conveyed confidence, experience, and an unspoken authority. Even in silence, she dominated the room. The team assembled for the mission was a mix of seasoned soldiers and intelligence operatives, each with specialized skills. Pilots, demolitions experts, snipers, and reconnaissance specialists stood ready, aware that the operation would push them to their limits. They had heard of Specter 6, but seeing her in person was another matter entirely. She radiated competence, control, and fearlessness. Some whispered that she had survived impossible odds before and would do so again. Others simply watched, silent, feeling the weight of history in her presence. The general concluded the briefing with a final warning. "This mission will not wait for perfection. You will face unforeseen challenges. Adaptability is key. Specter 6 will lead. Trust her. Follow her. And remember, failure is not an option. The world is counting on you." Specter 6 stood silently as the general's words settled. She did not need to command. Her presence alone conveyed authority. Every team member understood their role, yet they also understood that she was the anchor, the pivot upon which success or failure would hinge. As the room emptied and preparations began, officers whispered among themselves. "She's incredible," one said. Another nodded silently, recognizing that the legend was real. Specter 6 had not only returned history to life, but had also become the embodiment of what the mission demanded: unmatched skill, precision, and survival instinct beyond ordinary understanding. Later, when the team gathered for final preparations, she reviewed the operational maps once more. Every detail was accounted for: the timing of enemy patrols, the location of security cameras, alternate routes, extraction points, and fallback contingencies. She visualized every step, every movement, every obstacle, as if she were rehearsing the mission in real time. Nothing was left to chance. A young operative, nervous but determined, asked, "How do you do it? How do you remain so calm?" Specter 6's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "Focus," she said simply. "Discipline. Experience. Every threat has a pattern. Every risk can be anticipated. Fear is a tool, it sharpens awareness. Panic is a weakness, it leads to mistakes. Control your mind, control your environment, and you control survival." Her words were met with a quiet understanding. The team felt both reassured and challenged. They knew that following her meant putting absolute trust in her judgment, instincts, and experience. And there was no room for doubt. As night fell, preparations intensified. Equipment was checked, weapons loaded, communications tested, and intelligence verified. The desert wind swept through the base, carrying dust, anticipation, and the weight of history. Specter 6 moved among her team with quiet authority, ensuring readiness while instilling confidence. Her presence was magnetic, commanding, and utterly unshakable. Finally, the moment arrived. The team gathered near the extraction point, ready to depart. The world outside remained oblivious, unaware that history, legend, and extraordinary skill were about to move through its shadows. Specter 6 took one last look at her team, assessing readiness, measuring confidence, and ensuring cohesion. "Remember," she said quietly, yet firmly, "we are ghosts. Move silently. Strike precisely. Survive relentlessly. Nothing else matters." And with that, The mission began. The night was alive with shadows. A pale moon hung over the desert like a silent sentinel, casting long, distorted shapes across the terrain. The air was dry and sharp, carrying the scent of sand, metal, and tension. Specter 6 and her team moved like ghosts, slipping through darkness and debris, every step calculated, every sound muted. The mission demanded perfection, yet even the most experienced operatives felt the weight of doubt pressing against their minds. Doubt had a way of creeping in quietly, often unnoticed until it had already taken root. For the younger members of the team, whispers of fear had already begun. Could they really succeed where others had failed? Could they survive the hazards of enemy territory, complex fortifications, and an unpredictable foe? Questions flitted through their minds, unspoken but palpable. Yet with every step, every silent maneuver, they followed Specter 6, the living embodiment of competence and calm. The older, seasoned soldiers fared no better. They had seen ambushes, betrayals, and missions collapse under pressure. Yet even they found themselves questioning the impossible feat they were about to attempt. Her presence, however, was a constant anchor. She moved with precision, scanning, calculating, adjusting, yet somehow radiating serenity. Watching her, the team began to understand that doubt was a tool, not a trap. The operative's resolve was contagious, an almost hypnotic lesson in discipline, focus, and unwavering confidence. As the team approached their first checkpoint, the desert seemed to hold its breath. Enemy patrols were rumored to be frequent and unpredictable. Communication was limited to hand signals and subtle gestures. One operative hesitated, glancing at the shadows ahead, questioning the terrain, the risks, the unseen threats. His fear was human, understandable, yet it threatened to compromise the delicate rhythm of their movement. Specter 6 noticed immediately. She placed a steady hand on his shoulder, her touch brief but commanding. "Focus," she whispered, low enough that only he could hear. "Fear is not your enemy. Hesitation is. Trust your training. Trust your instincts. Trust me." The operative nodded, swallowing hard, as a sense of clarity replaced panic. Her words were not empty. They carried the weight of experience, survival, and proof. She had faced far worse odds than this. She had lived where others died. And in that knowledge, she became more than a leader. She became a symbol of inevitability, a guide through chaos. The terrain grew more treacherous as they moved closer to the enemy compound. Rocks jutted from the sand like jagged teeth. Patrols could appear at any moment, armed and ready. Communications were intentionally minimal to avoid detection, forcing each team member to rely on observation and intuition. One wrong move could alert the enemy, compromise the mission, or cost lives. Doubt began to rise again among the younger operatives. "Are we sure this path is safe?" One muttered under his breath, voice trembling. Another shook his head subtly, fear glinting in his eyes. They had followed legends before, but even legends could fail. Even legends could die. Specter 6 paused, scanning the horizon. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, tracing invisible patterns in the shifting shadows. She assessed the terrain, the potential threats, the movement of the enemy, and the positioning of her team. She spoke finally, her voice calm and precise. "No path is ever completely safe. Safety is an illusion. Survival comes from precision, awareness, and resolve. Move carefully. Trust your instincts. Trust each other. And trust me." Her words settled over the team like a protective veil. Doubt, while not eradicated, became disciplined. Fear became focus. Hesitation became calculated movement. Every operative adjusted to her rhythm, following the unspoken cadence of a soldier who had walked through impossible scenarios countless times. Hours passed as they navigated dunes, abandoned ruins, and dry riverbeds. The team encountered a series of unexpected obstacles: an uncharted patrol, a collapsed bridge, a sudden sandstorm. Each could have compromised the mission. Each demanded split-second decisions. And each was met with her resolve. Specter 6 led with quiet authority, directing movement, adjusting plans, and ensuring no one faltered. Her experience was palpable, her calm unshakable. One particularly tense moment arrived when the team encountered an unexpected patrol. The enemy moved silently, weapons ready, eyes sharp, unaware that Specter 6 had already observed their approach. She signaled the team to freeze, her hand precise, her movements fluid. Time seemed to slow. Every heartbeat, every breath, was measured. The patrol passed within meters, oblivious to the ghosts moving around them. When the threat had passed, the team exhaled collectively, tension spilling out in a wave of relief. A younger operative whispered, "I don't know how you do it. How do you stay calm?" Specter 6's gaze met his, unwavering and direct. "Calm is not given," she said. "It is earned. Through preparation, experience, and understanding that fear is not the enemy, it is information. Fear tells you where to focus. Doubt tells you what to consider. Resolve turns both into tools for survival." The team absorbed her words, each operative internalizing her philosophy in real time as the mission continued. The desert around them was vast, empty, and unforgiving. Sandstorms, heat, and exhaustion threatened to sap their strength. Enemy patrols remained unpredictable, and yet they moved steadily, silently, following the rhythm set by their leader. Night stretched on. Hours of tension and movement left muscles aching, minds alert, and nerves frayed. One of the younger soldiers stumbled, nearly tripping over jagged rocks. Before panic could take hold, Specter 6 was there, steadying him with a hand that was both firm and reassuring. "Keep moving," she said simply. "We adapt. We survive. One step at a time." Her words became a mantra for the team. Every obstacle, every doubt, every fear was met with resolve. The legend they had followed in whispers had become tangible, guiding them through dangers they could scarcely have imagined. By the time they reached the perimeter of the target compound, dawn was approaching. Shadows stretched, the air grew cooler, and the first hints of light painted the desert in muted tones. The team was weary, alert, and on edge. Doubt had not vanished entirely, but it had been disciplined, transformed into focus, anticipation, and careful calculation. Specter 6 paused, scanning the compound through binoculars. Enemy positions, surveillance cameras, and guards were noted, memorized, and incorporated into a strategy that left no detail unconsidered. She turned to the team, voice calm but firm. "We enter at first light. Timing is critical. Every movement matters. Do not hesitate. Trust yourself. Trust your neighbor. Trust me. We will succeed because hesitation is not allowed. Focus is everything." Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of experience, proof, and inevitability. The team nodded, understanding that every ounce of doubt, every flicker of fear, had to be transformed into action. They had survived the desert, the obstacles, the patrols. They would survive this next step if they followed her guidance. In that quiet moment, just before the operation commenced, the young operative whispered again, "I still don't know how you do it. How do you remain unshaken?" Specter 6 looked at him, eyes sharp and unyielding. "Because I have walked through worse," she said. "I have faced death and returned. I have survived when all hope was gone. You will survive because you prepare, you observe, and you follow. Resolve is stronger than fear. Precision is stronger than doubt. And the truth is that hesitation kills. The words resonated through the team. Doubt still lingered, but it had been disciplined, controlled, transformed into readiness. Fear was no longer paralyzing, it was guiding attention. The team knew now, with absolute certainty, that Specter 6 was not just a legend in stories, but the living embodiment of survival, calm, and inevitability. As the first rays of dawn touched the desert, the team approached the final obstacle before entering the compound. Shadows lengthened. The operation was about to begin. Every heartbeat, every breath, every step was measured. Doubt had been acknowledged, confronted, and transformed into determination. Resolve had been forged in the crucible of fear, danger, and experience. Specter 6 led her team forward, silent, precise, and unyielding, ready to turn myth into action, legend into reality, and doubt into triumph. The mission was beginning, and failure was not an option. Dawn had barely broken when the team reached the perimeter of the target compound. The desert was bathed in muted gold, shadows stretching long across jagged rocks and abandoned ruins. A thin wind carried the scent of sand and metal, mingled with the distant hum of machinery deep within the fortified compound. Specter 6 led her team with quiet precision, every movement deliberate, every step calculated, as though the desert itself responded to her rhythm. The perimeter was heavily guarded. Surveillance cameras scanned in slow arcs, guards patrolled in unpredictable patterns, and the walls bristled with sensors. The mission's complexity was immediate and unforgiving. One misstep could trigger alarms, turning the operation from surgical precision into chaos. Doubt lurked in the minds of her team, subtle but persistent. Yet Specter 6's presence countered it like a lodestar. She signaled the team to halt and crouch behind a sand dune. Her eyes, sharp and unblinking, scanned the area, analyzing every guard's movement, every camera's rotation, and every shadow that could conceal a threat. Her mind worked at a level beyond ordinary comprehension, calculating risk and opportunity simultaneously. Every muscle in her body was taut with focus, yet her movements were fluid, natural, almost effortless. "We move on my signal," she whispered, voice calm, yet imbued with authority. Silence, precision, adaptation. Remember, hesitation kills. Focus on the objective. Everything else is secondary. The team nodded, internalizing her instructions. Their trust in her was absolute, born from witnessing her resolve and competence through the long, tense night. Even the most skeptical operatives could not ignore the aura of inevitability she carried. With a subtle hand gesture, Specter 6 led the team forward. They crept across the dunes, using shadows and terrain as cover, avoiding sensors and blind spots with calculated ease. The enemy guards were vigilant, but none suspected the silent ghosts moving within their perimeter. Every step was a delicate balance of stealth, awareness, and timing. A sudden noise, a clatter of rocks underfoot made a young operative freeze. He glanced around nervously, eyes wide, fingers gripping his weapon too tightly. Specter 6 moved beside him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "Control your breath," she murmured, low enough that only he could hear. "Fear is information. It tells you what to focus on. Use it." The operative nodded, trembling slightly but regaining composure. He followed her lead, understanding for the first time that panic was an enemy. But discipline and focus could turn fear into an advantage. The team moved again, each step synchronized with her calm rhythm. The compound came into view, a sprawling network of reinforced buildings, walls topped with razor wire and patrolled gates. From this distance, the magnitude of the challenge became clear. The enemy had prepared for a strike team, but they had not anticipated her. Specter 6 scanned the compound, memorizing patrol patterns, identifying weak points. and calculating the fastest route to the target. Two teams flank the northern wall, she instructed quietly. I take point with the others. Entry is through the eastern gate, where patrol rotations are longest. Remember, cameras are blind for exactly 6 seconds every rotation. Timing is critical. The team split silently, executing their assigned positions with flawless precision. Even the most skilled operatives had never witnessed such control over timing and coordination. Every movement was precise, almost choreographed, but born from instinct, experience, and deadly calculation. As they approached the eastern gate, a patrol unexpectedly changed direction. Time seemed to slow. The young operative nearest to the gate froze, fear evident in his wide eyes. Specter 6 reacted instantly, a silent hand signal guiding him to press against the wall. She slid forward, body low, moving like water, and neutralized the patrol with swift, silent efficiency. The team exhaled collectively, tension spilling into the empty air. One of the senior operatives whispered, barely audible, "She's unstoppable." Others nodded silently, realizing that her presence alone made the impossible feasible. The eastern gate presented the next challenge. Sensors glowed faintly, and the walls were reinforced. Specter 6 scanned carefully, assessing the structural weaknesses and timing of patrols. "We go now," she whispered. "Follow my lead exactly." Using a combination of stealth, precise timing, and calculated risk, the team breached the gate. Inside, the compound was a labyrinth of corridors, offices, and guarded areas. Enemy operatives moved like shadows, unaware of the silent intruders navigating the halls with lethal intent. Doubt and fear surfaced briefly within the team as they encountered their first significant resistance. Guards appeared unexpectedly, armed and alert. A firefight seemed inevitable, yet Specter 6's calm command controlled the chaos. She directed the team with hand signals, flanking maneuvers, and calculated suppressive fire. Shots rang out, echoing in the compound, but only where necessary, precise and efficient. The team adapted instantly, executing her plan with deadly accuracy. At one point, a young operative hesitated under pressure, facing a locked door with a guard approaching from the other side. Specter 6 was already there, guiding, instructing, and leading without hesitation. Within moments, the obstacle was neutralized, the threat eliminated, and the team moved onward without breaking formation. The mission stakes were never clearer. Every second mattered, every misstep was critical. Yet even under pressure, Specter 6 remained unflinching. Her calm command infused the team with confidence. Doubt became secondary, fear became focus, and hesitation vanished under the weight of her leadership. Finally, they reached the inner sanctum, the target location. Intel indicated that the rogue network's leader and critical intelligence were secured inside. Guards were heavy, surveillance intense, and extraction would be complicated. Specter 6 surveyed the room, calculating risk, timing, and positions. "Prepare for entry," she instructed, voice calm but firm. "We go in 3. 1, 2, 3. The team moved as one, breaching doors, disabling guards, and securing the target with lethal precision. The operation unfolded like a carefully executed symphony. Every movement was calculated, every decision instantaneous, yet no one faltered. The intelligence was retrieved, the target secured, and the team prepared for exfiltration. Even as alarms began to sound, the team followed Specter 6 flawlessly. Her calm authority guided them through obstacles, ambushes, and enemy resistance. Where ordinary operatives would have panicked, hesitation was replaced with focus, fear with precision, and doubt with resolve. By the time they reached the extraction point, the mission's success was evident. Enemy forces were disoriented, the target secured, and the intelligence intact. The team had survived impossible odds, guided by one operative whose legend had become reality. As the sun rose over the desert, painting the landscape in muted gold and red, the team gathered at the extraction point. Breathless, weary, but alive, they realized the magnitude of what they had accomplished. They had faced impossible odds, navigated hostile territory, and executed a mission that few thought feasible. And they had done it because of her. Specter 6 stood among them, calm and composed, her eyes scanning the horizon even as adrenaline still coursed through her veins. The team looked at her with awe, respect, and a quiet understanding that they had witnessed history in motion. They had followed a legend into the fire and emerged victorious. The young operative, who had doubted earlier, approached quietly. I don't know how you do it," he said softly. "I don't know how you remain unshaken." Specter 6 looked at him, eyes unwavering, voice steady. "Because I have faced death before," she said simply. "Because I have survived when others would have fallen. And because when the mission matters, doubt and fear are luxuries we cannot afford. Resolve and focus are everything. Remember that. Live by it. Survive by it." As the helicopter approached for extraction, kicking up clouds of sand and dust, the team moved quickly, silently, and efficiently. They had executed the impossible, survived the fire, and emerged intact. But for Specter 6, the mission was never about glory. It was about precision, survival, and completing what others could not. The legend had proven real. The myth had become flesh. And as the desert receded beneath the rotor blades, the team carried with them a lesson in courage, skill, and resolve that would remain forever etched in memory. Specter 6 led them through the fire, and they survived because of her. The helicopter rose above the desert, kicking up clouds of sand and dust, carrying Specter 6 and her team away from the compound that had tested every skill, instinct, and nerve they possessed. The morning sun painted the horizon in hues of gold and crimson, illuminating the landscape of desolation they had just navigated with precision and courage. Each member of the team sat quietly, adrenaline slowly fading, exhaustion creeping into their muscles, but awe lingering in their hearts. The weight of what they had accomplished settled over them. They had faced impossible odds, breached a fortified compound, neutralized enemy resistance, and secured intelligence that could prevent disaster on a global scale. They had done it without detection, without unnecessary loss, and with a level of precision that seemed beyond human capability. The mission was complete, but its magnitude only began to reveal itself as reality set in. Specter 6 remained calm at the front, scanning the horizon through the helicopter's open hatch. Her body was relaxed, yet every sense remained alert, every instinct tuned to survival. She had done this countless times before, yet each mission carried its own unique dangers. There was no room for complacency, no allowance for error. Success was not measured by the extraction alone, it was measured by the integrity of the mission, by every life preserved, and by every objective achieved. The team glanced at her, understanding instinctively what words could not convey. They had witnessed something extraordinary. Her calm under pressure, her ability to anticipate every threat, and her unwavering focus had turned doubt into resolve, fear into precision, and impossibility into reality. For many, it was the first time they had truly seen a living legend in action, not in stories, rumors, or classified reports, but in flesh and blood, breathing and commanding respect with quiet authority. The youngest operative, still shaken by the intensity of the mission, broke the silence. I still can't believe it. I don't know how you stay so steady. How you do it." Specter 6 glanced at him briefly, her eyes steady, calm, and unyielding. "Experience teaches you," she said. "Every mission, every challenge, every failure and success, they build you. Fear becomes information. Doubt becomes calculation. Resolve becomes instinct. You survive not because you are fearless, but because you learn to control every part of yourself. And when the mission matters, that control is everything. The teen fell silent again, absorbing her words. The wisdom in them was hard-earned, forged in the crucible of impossible missions and survival beyond ordinary limits. Every operative understood that her calm, unshakable demeanor was not innate. It was forged through trials that most would not endure, and through sacrifices that were unseen and unspoken. As the helicopter lifted higher, leaving the desert and the compound far below, the teen's communications crackled with updates from command. The rogue network's operations had been neutralized. Intelligence had been secured. Potential threats had been averted. The mission was a success, but the broader implications were only beginning to become clear. Lives had been saved. Nations had been spared. And the legend of Specter 6 had grown, both among those who witnessed her and in the whispers of those who would hear of this mission later. General Harlan's voice came over the secure line. Mission accomplished. I've reviewed the preliminary reports. Your execution was flawless. Exceptional work. 6. Exceptional work. Team. Specter 6 responded with a simple acknowledgement, her tone calm but respectful. Understood. We will debrief upon return. Extraction complete. The team remained quiet for the rest of the flight, fatigue and reflection intertwining. Each operative had been tested to the edge of their limits, both physically and mentally. Some had faced fears they had never confronted before. Others had confronted their own doubt in real time, learning that hesitation could be transformed into action when guided by skill, discipline, and leadership. And through it all, Specter 6 had been the constant beacon of certainty in a landscape of chaos. Hours later, the helicopter touched down on the secure base. The team disembarked, carrying the evidence, the intelligence, and the silent weight of accomplishment. They moved efficiently, professionally, yet there was a subtle reverence in their demeanor. They had survived an impossible mission. They had followed a legend into the fire and lived to tell the story. In the debriefing room, reports were filed, intelligence was analyzed, and lessons were meticulously recorded. Yet even as the operational details were documented, the team and command could not ignore the human element, the force that had guided them, protected them, and ensured success. Specter 6's calm authority, her precise instincts, and her unmatched skill were the difference between failure and victory. General Harlan addressed the room once more. Today, we witnessed something extraordinary. Not just the execution of a mission, but the embodiment of skill, leadership, and resolve. Specter 6 is not only a legend in reports and whispers, she is a living example of what can be achieved when training, experience, and focus converge. A wave of respect swept through the room. Some officers nodded quietly, others sat in reflective awe. But all recognized the truth. The mission's success was inseparable from the presence of the one known as Specter 6. She had transformed doubt into action, fear into precision, and impossibility into reality. After the debriefing, the team gathered in a quiet room, finally able to release some of the tension that had bound them for hours. Conversations were hushed, punctuated by quiet acknowledgments of accomplishment and subtle admiration for the operative who had led them through the impossible. The young operative who had struggled with doubt approached her again. "I just thank you," he said softly, "for leading us, for showing us what's possible." Specter 6 looked at him, eyes steady, voice calm but warm. "You did well," she said. "You survived. You adapted. You focused. Remember this feeling. Remember what it takes to overcome impossible odds. That is what you carry forward. That is your training, your experience, and your resolve. Never forget it." Outside, The sun was higher, casting the base in sharp light. The desert beyond was vast and indifferent, as it had always been. Yet the mission had changed something fundamental. Specter 6 had returned not only as a legend, but as proof that the impossible could be achieved. The myth had walked among them, guided them, and ensured survival. As she prepared to leave the debriefing room, her eyes scanned the team one last time. Each operative had been tested, each had survived, and each had witnessed history firsthand. Her presence had transformed their understanding of skill, courage, and leadership. And for the first time in years, the call sign she bore, Specter 6, felt less like a title and more like a legacy. The world outside would never know the details of the mission. The intelligence, the precision, the risks, most of it, would remain classified, buried in secure files, and whispered in secret channels. But within those walls, among those who had survived and participated, a story had been written. A story of courage, of focus, and of survival. A story of a legend made real. Specter 6 walked toward the hangar, her movements calm, precise, and purposeful. The rotor blades of the departing helicopter cut the air, dust swirling around her boots. She paused for a moment, glancing back at the base, the team, and the desert that had tested them all. History had been made. A legend had endured. And though the world outside would not know her name, those who had witnessed her would carry the story forever. Because Specter 6 was more than a soldier. She was a force, a guide, and a living testament to what could be achieved when skill, resolve, and experience converged. The impossible had been achieved. Doubt had been conquered. Fear had been harnessed. And the legend endured, not in whispers, not in reports, but in the hearts and minds of those who had survived the fire alongside her. As she disappeared into the shadows of the hangar, preparing for the next mission, the legacy of her name remained unbroken. Specter 6 had returned, had led, and had ensured survival where none thought possible. And though history may forget the details, the legend would never fade, because some stories are too powerful to die, and some operatives are too skilled to be forgotten. Specter 6, a legend, a survivor, and a force that the world would never truly comprehend.